Welcome all to the meeting of the Children and Young People's Committee. The first item on the agenda is the notification of the appointment of the Chair and Vice Chair. Council was pleased to appoint Councillor Simon Bywater as Chair of the Committee and Councillor Samantha Hoy as Vice Chair for 2020-21 when it met on the 19th of May 2020.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and thank you members for entrusting me with a very responsible position of chair. I would like to welcome those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the council's website. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely in accordance with the provisions set out in the local authorities and police and crime panels coronavirus flexibility of local authority and police and crime panel meetings, England and Wales Regulations 2020, and with the Cambridgeshire County Council's own virtual meeting protocol. A decision summary of the minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view via the council website. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the committee to keep their video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphones muted except when I invite them to speak. Officers will join us to introduce their reports in the usual way. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function on the right hand side of their screen, which is the little blue hand symbol. There will be no points of order or personal explanation. As with all new arrangements, especially those involving a new system, there is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned and reconvened at a later date. Please also note that to facilitate the discussion, I intended to waiver the committee procedure rules limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes. I also propose to allow members to speak more than once on each item, if appropriate. However, make sure that your contributions remain concise and to the point, and I would remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is apologies for absence. I will begin by calling the names of all members of the committee to establish your presence. Please unmute your microphones now, and when I ask your name, just say yes, present. We have received apologies from Flavio Vitesse, who is the co-opted member representing the Roman Catholic Diocese of Ely. Okay, so Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Present.
Councillor Downs.
Yes.
Councillor Every.
Present.
Councillor Hay.
Present.
Councillor Hoy.
Present.
Councillor Netzinger.
Present.
Councillor Simon Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Whitehead.
Present.
Councillor Wisson.
Present.
Andrew Reid, representing the Church of England Diocese of Ely.
Present.
And myself. Thank you very much, members. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 3, which is the declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Councillor Every.
Although I've declared this before, I feel that I ought to declare that I'm a governor at CMAT, which is the trust which has Northstowe, which will be item number item number 7 on the agenda. I just felt I ought to say that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And any other members? Jonathan Lewis.
Sorry, Simon, just to say I'm also a governor at Northstowe, so I perhaps should refrain from comment as well. So,
okay, thank you very much, John. Okay, I see no other hands raised, so we'll move on. Again, if you do have something that comes up through the meeting, just draw it to my attention. Okay, so agenda item number 4 is the minutes of the meeting on the 7th of May. We're being asked to approve the minutes of this particular meeting as an accurate record. The minutes were published on the 21st of May and circulated to all members by email. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal to click the raised hand function on the right hand side of your screen now. Simone Taylor.
Yeah, hi. I just remember asking for clarification on the GCSEs, and Jonathan did give a response to that, but I don't, unless I've missed it, but I don't remember reading it in the minutes.
Okay. Do you want something added to the minutes then, Simone? Is that what you're saying, or has it been omitted?
Yeah, I definitely asked it, and I definitely remember the response. Whether we had a technical hitch at the time, I don't remember. I don't know. But yeah, if we could just have some sort of response, just to say, because there was no sort of update. I wanted to see if there was any update on the situation with GCSEs, but there wasn't. So it'd be good just to add a little bit in there.
Tamar, can we take that as an action?
Yes, noted.
Okay. Any other members? Okay, so I see no other hands being raised. So on that basis, we approve the minutes as carried. I will sign a hard copy when we return to the office. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is the action log. If any members have any questions on the action log, which was circulated in the agenda, would they raise their hand function on the right hand side of the screen to show that they want to make a comment? Okay, so no members have indicated that they wish to speak on the action log, so we'll record it as noted. Thank you. Agenda item number 6, which is petitions and public questions. We received no public questions or petitions, so we'll move on to the next item, which is a key decision item number 7, the North Stowe Secondary College proposed change of age range post 16. Kathy Stansby, the project officer, would you introduce the item, please? The proposed change of age range at North Stowe. I also think Claire Buckingham is here as well, but Kathy, if you could start, and then if you want Claire to come in, if you could just ask her to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Kathy Stansby. This is my first time to committee. And just so that you're aware, I'm a project officer for the Education Directorate, specifically with Hazel Bell Chamber Service. So I just want to highlight a few points because you have got the report with regard to the committee's decision on the proposal by the governing body of North Stowe Secondary College to change the designation. A briefing summary paper has already been presented to lead education members with the recommendation that it comes to this committee. So from page 10 of your agenda packs, in terms of the background points, I wanted just to make you aware that at the start of the North Stowe development, it was recognised that there was a need for the secondary and post-16 provision, and that there is a post-16 provision contribution due from the developers to be spent by the county council solely on the delivery and the provision of post-16 education. Of course, the local authority has a statutory duty for post-16 education, but changes in legislation means that the local authority is more now a commissioner rather than a provider. So in terms of presumptions, in 2008 and 2009, Cambridgeshire Meridian Education Trust was awarded 2 separate presumptions, one by the County Council for the secondary with post-16 provision, and one by the Learning and Skills Council, who at that time were responsible for post-16 provision in Cambridgeshire, and that was for post-16 provision. And the intention was always that the provision would be integrated, and at some stage an age range change would be required. So some of the main points going on from page 11 of the agenda pack. In 2019, in September, the secondary school opened as North Stowe Secondary College with a cohort of 7 year. And in January this year, 2020, the governing body of the school applied to extend the age range of the college following liaison with the local authority and in line with the earlier presumptions. So the governing body completed a proposal following the DfE prescribed alteration guidance. And you'll see that pre-consultation took place, which involved a wide range of stakeholders, and they included the Cambridgeshire Academic Partnership, who oversee the post-16 provision in Cambridgeshire. District Council, community groups, etc. are involved. And then the main consultation period was extended because it fell over the Easter period to allow as many respondents as possible. From this, the council has 8 weeks to make a decision on this proposal, or the decision will pass to the school's adjudicator. And the end of this 8 weeks is early June, just so that you know. However, in light of COVID-19 situation, DfE advice was sought as to whether the 8-week decision period still applied. The DfE did confirm that it did still apply, and if a decision was not taken, it would still pass to the school's adjudicator. So based on this advice, the governing body offered an additional meeting via Zoom. I think that was the 12th of May, and that was in an effort to make sure that everything possible was done to ensure that everybody had the opportunity to comment. And so from that, the governing body provided the local authority with a summary of the consultation and responses, which is at the end of your agenda report. And you will see that the responses received are all in favour of the proposal. So thank you, Chair. That's the end of my summary points.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Members, have members any got questions they'd like to ask Kathy on the report?
Oh, hang on.
Peter Downs.
Yes, thank you. I've got on to factual questions first of all, and then more comments later on. How many forms of entry is the current secondary college?
At the moment, it's 4 forms of entry, which will then increase to 12 forms of entry.
To 12 forms of entry, thank you.
Yes.
Right, well, that in a sense answers my second factual question is,
Okay.
to produce a sixth form of 400, you need a 12 form entry, basically.
Oh,
and
okay.
and I was not quite clear from the papers presented whether that's been borne in mind. But if you say 12 forms of entry, if it is a normal demographic, then it should just about produce that number thing. So that should be all right.
Okay.
I've got some questions later on.
Do you want to ask it now, Peter?
Well, yeah, okay then, righto. I mean, I should say straight away that I think this is the right thing to do. I mean, I'm not making any objection, but I just want to ask 1 or 2 questions of clarification and just wonder whether the people involved are fully aware of what the challenges are. I'm looking at page 11 at the moment, if you can find that in your papers, and
Yeah.
and I've got 2 paragraphs. I just want to express 1 or 2 concerns, shall we say, in the context that I'm not, as it were, in any sense seeking to disagree with the proposal. In paragraph 2.2.3, it says that by extending this stage range post 16, the governing body is confident it will be able to achieve greater coherence and it will bring benefits through economies of scale. Now, that used to be true when post 16 funding was generous.
Right.
It is no longer true in the present situation because post 16 funding is not generous, and it is becoming extremely difficult for schools with sixth forms to make ends meet. And there was a time, frankly, when sixth forms were so generously funded that the school with the sixth form was able to actually transfer some of its spare money from the sixth form down to younger age groups. But that is no longer the case. So I am just a little bit concerned about that statement about the economies of scale. My next reservation, or my next concern, is paragraph 2.2.4. And this is the question of the partnership between NSC and Ely, Sawtry, Long Road and Hills Road, so that A-levels can be provided. Now, the problem with smallish sixth forms is being able to provide the full range of A-levels. I mean, that is, that's been going on for years and years and years. And I can, to some extent, draw on my experience here, having been head of a school with a small sixth form, but which worked in a consortium with other schools. And I can tell you that though it was an excellent intention, it was extremely difficult to manage. Very, very difficult to manage. And that was in Oxfordshire, where all the schools involved were actually very close to each other, just a few miles away. The schools in this proposed consortium, if you like to call it that, are dispersed, very widely dispersed. I mean, to have Sawtry involved, for example, is extremely difficult to see how that could work out. I would want to know. I'd want to know whether or not the intention is for the students to travel to Sawtry for their A-level minority subject A-levels, or for the teachers to come from Sawtry to North, and the same with Ely and Long Road and Hills Road. It does seem to me to be ambitious and impractical to run a consortium with that geography. So I am concerned about that. And as we've got two governors here, you presumably can reassure us that all these practical considerations have been taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Cathy, I'll give you the opportunity to come back on the points raised, but if anybody wants to speak on this, just raise their hand. But Cathy, do you want
to? Thank you, Chair. I think actually that should be handed over. It's not something that I would be able to comment on.
Okay, thank you, Cathy. John, you've raised your hand. So, John, would you just like to come in here?
Yeah, just very briefly, I don't disagree with Peter's assertion around the funding situation. It's certainly tough, but a 400 sixth form is probably better than many of the other small sixth forms we have across the country that are really struggling. So I think that's something that the trusts will need to be very mindful of as they move forward. In relation to the provision of the sixth form that's going to be delivered, it's about teachers moving between those different places. So, we talk about shortest subject areas in A-levels, things like music, for instance. They hope to share staff between the different establishments to do that, rather than move children around, because that's not always practical and logistically quite challenging. So it's about offering more breadth maybe than there is in terms of that they would have otherwise. So I think it's a positive step forward, and it's certainly something that we're speculating a little bit on, because it's another 3 or 4 years before children are old enough to attend this sixth form. But I'm sure the CYP committee will be kept up to date with the curriculum offer as it moves forward.
Okay. Thank you, John. Simone Taylor, Councillor Taylor, Simone Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just going to touch on the consultation. I know, obviously, that it was taken in this period of uncertainty, and we couldn't, you couldn't actually be in a physical place. But there was only sort of, what you have come back on the consultation is absolutely positive. But my concern is that I think one parent replied. Does this concern you that later on that they might say, well, we didn't have this opportunity? Just a comment on that would be great.
Yes, I think I've been liaising with the school in terms of this proposal, because the proposal is from the governing body of the school. and advice was sought, and the school and governing body do believe they've made every effort. What they did and have said is that because this has been the intention for quite a period of time, that the parents of the school children and others involved were well aware of the intention to extend the age range. And that's the extent of the discussion I've had with the governing body in terms of your question.
Thank you. That's fine. Like you say, you know, it's just, I think I personally think it's just the situation that we're at now. If it was conducted in a different manner, I think you would have got more replies. But it sounds like that they've all been, you know, totally liaisoned with and consulted. So thank you.
Thank you.
John, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, just very briefly, in terms of consultation, obviously it's a relatively small parent group. Not all of them actually live in Northstowe either at the moment, so longer term it may not be the sixth form they go to. My experience of sixth form consultation is that you focus more on those that oppose it, because they're the ones that are challenging, why are you doing it? Is it taking students away from me? And we've had none of that response. So the fact it's a collaborative offer, particularly with Hills and Long Road, reassures me that actually consultation was there, but people accept it, and they've not necessarily said they do, but they're not objecting to it.
Okay, thanks, John. Lucy Netzinger, Councillor Netzinger, would you like to come in?
Thank you. It's on a similar point, but rather than parents, as Jonathan said, it's about the other institutions who this is likely to impact on, who I think are in some ways the most important people to consult with. It's good to see that it's supported by Hills Road and Long Road, but actually the sixth form that's most likely to have an impact from this opening is Impington, which would be the clearest. They don't seem to have responded to the consultation. I can see that in the long term, there's going to be plenty of students for both of them in this area, but in the shorter term, it could be an issue. Could you just confirm that they are aware of it, and that the planning about the gradual phased opening of it will be done with some thought about other local institutions?
Yes, thank you for that. I wouldn't be able to confirm that because it is a proposal by the governing body. However, I am aware that they took every effort to consult with sixth form providers in Cambridgeshire and have consulted. That would be a question really for the governing body. John,
would you like to come in here, please?
Just to say, I think there would be that dialogue. Obviously, I've seen CMAT and the Morris Trust work together on developments already, so I think there's a good relationship there. It's also worth pointing out that Impington provides a slightly different offer. They do international baccalaureate as opposed to A-levels, which is the offer that Northstowe are working. So I think whilst there will be some competition, there are actually slightly different offers, and that's probably a good thing for giving choice to our students, particularly as we know longer term the amount of sixth form provision we've got, particularly in the city, is going to be limited. So I think, you know, it's probably a good development that we've got such choice, and we'll just have to handle the numbers very carefully.
Thank you.
Okay, before I come to Councillor Whitehead, Claire, you've indicated you want to come in. Is it on this point?
Yes, it is. Yes, please. Just a couple of things. The proposal was raised with on one of the agendas of the secondary heads meeting. So Impington, I'm sure, would have been represented there and would have been aware of it. And also CAP, the Cambridge Area Partnership, was also consulted, and Impington is a member of that area, of the CAP area. So I think we can reassure Councillor Netzinger that they would have been aware, very much so.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor Joan Whitehead, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Again, it's a comment, just a brief comment on the consultation. I see that pupils and parents combined were only 5 responses, and I take Jonathan's point that it's a very small parent body, but presumably a small pupil one as well. Do we take it that that just is, you know, silence means consent or apathy, that so few pupils actually responded?
Councillor Whitehead, I think it is based on what Jonathan has said, and in speaking with the governing body, they were not expecting the consultation to elicit too many responses. Despite that, they did make many efforts in terms of meetings and, as you can see, an additional meeting to try and get as many responses as possible.
Sorry, could I come back, Chair? So do I take it that they only collected comments by meetings? There wasn't any kind of survey of pupils in the school, for example?
No, they did a survey, they did an online meeting, 2 online meetings, and staff consultation as well. So they did a number with regard to getting responses on the proposal.
Okay, John was shaking, nodding his head there as well. So thank you. Joan, have you got any more you want to say on that?
No, not really. It just seems a very, very small response from the pupils, particularly, you know, if they were consulted, not just in meetings, but by some kind of pencil and paper survey or, you know, computer survey. It does seem a rather small number, but again, it could be, well, you know, I have no strong views. I think it's okay, or I couldn't care less. I don't think it's particularly significant, but it just is very small.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's also worthy to note that local members have all been made aware of this as well, and I've not received any comments. There's nothing significant come back from any local members that are impacted by this. Is that right, Kathy?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Okay, members. Joan, you still got your hand up. I take it that's just needs to come off there, does it? Thank you very much. Okay, so there are no other members indicating they want to speak on this. So we'll now move to the vote on the proposed change. So the change of age range post 16 at North Stowe Secondary College. As these recommendations relate to the council's education function, the co-opted members of the committee will be invited to vote on this item. Okay, the recommendation, I'm going to read the recommendations out because obviously people are watching this stream, so just so make it clear. Can you just indicate, nobody's indicated, are we happy to take this on block, or do you want me to go for every individual member? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'll read the recommendations and then if nobody wants to speak on it, I'll take it in favour of the recommendations. So A is note the feedback received to the consultation undertaken by the governing body of North Stowe College, and B, prove as decision maker the proposal that North Stowe Secondary College alter its upper age range from 16 to 19 effective the 1st of September 2024. Okay, so would anybody like to vote independently of this, or can I take it as a unanimous decision? Okay, so we'll take that as a unanimous vote. Thank you very much, members. Kathy, thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
You can leave the meeting now if you choose to. Okay.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is the review of the fostering allowances for Cambridgeshire foster carers. There is an appendix to this report which contains exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of the Schedule 12 Alpha of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, in that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. Information relating to financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Do any members of the committee wish to discuss the exempt appendix? And I know it was circulated prior to this meeting. If we do, we'll have to move into private setting. Does anybody wish to disclose or discuss the detail, the financial detail in that confidential appendix? All members have got access to it. Okay, so I'm not seeing anybody raise that. So just to warn you that don't mention anything in that paper now. So we'll move to the presentation of the report from Lou Williams, the Service Director. Lou.
Thank you, Simon. Obviously you've got the report. I think it's fairly straightforward. What I'm seeking agreement from committee to do is to essentially take a further paper to General Purposes Committee to address any financial implications of this decision. You all know as members how important foster carers are to children in care, and recruiting our own foster carers specifically is important not only for our children in care but also for our financial well-being. We've taken the opportunity to review fostering allowances in Cambridgeshire, and the report and also the confidential appendix goes into a bit more detail, but the covering report indicates how actually over time we have a fairly complex range of allowances at the moment for foster carers, with 6 payment bands, whereas most authorities would only have 4. The proposal is to move to a 4-band system. The detail of this is that every foster carer in Cambridgeshire will see an increase in the allowances that they are paid, with the exception of carers who are receiving level 6 payments. Our proposal is not to continue with level 6 payments, although we will honour all children in placement who are receiving or whose carers are receiving a level 6 payment for them. It's an interesting thing, and lots of authorities have tried to set up what start off to be specialist fostering schemes, which are intended for more challenging young people and teenagers, for carers who are willing to take those children and young people, those older children and young people. And very often what they find is that those foster carers end up being used for much younger children, and indeed the audit report referenced in my report from just over a year ago was talking about how almost half of those carers are actually those children are long-term matched with those carers, and that's what very often happens with those specialist schemes. They become used for children who don't want to move on, which is fine, and that's great for them. But it's not actually the way that the scheme was intended to operate. So what we will do instead is we will be able to agree additional payments to foster carers when they are taking young people or children who've got more challenging needs. That works much better than having a blanket scheme. And in fact, the allowances paid at level 6 are really very high, and they're probably higher than independent fostering agency carers get. So this is about a compromise, about making sure that actually we are fulfilling the requirements of best practice in terms of making sure that we're paying at least the minimum DFE recommended rates to all of our carers. We're increasing rates quite a bit at the lower end, which will help us in our recruitment. We're simplifying it, which actually also makes it much more transparent. One of the things that foster carers do find upsetting is when they speak to other carers and they're essentially looking after similar children but getting different rates of allowances for doing so. That's something that's not popular with carers. If committee does agree to the recommendations on this report, we go to General Purposes Committee, which also agrees, we will also be continuing to consult with foster carers. We would want to do that anyway. We might tweak what we're suggesting in terms of the detail of the payments, but we'll retain it within the overall resource envelope that's before you today. Happy to take any questions. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Lou. Councillor Whitehead.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm on page 21, paragraph 2.11. I mean, it's not dealt with in the paper, and I just want to be reminded of the answer. You talked there, Lou, about the 4 age bands, the last one being 16 to 17-year-olds. Can you just remind us what happens to children who are in foster homes after the age of 17? Do they get a payment in their own right at that stage? It seems at the moment as if they continue in a foster home, there isn't any payment beyond 17.
So that's covered by something called staying put allowances. So it's not covered by fostering allowances. So fostering allowances are paid for children, and staying put allowances are paid for actually what they become as adults, obviously. So there is an allowance that's paid to our carers if they continue to look after adults of 18 years of age under a staying put arrangement. It's not as high as a fostering allowance, and that is that's benchmarked across the Eastern region, and I'm not sure what the figure is off the top of my head. I can find out for you if you would like to know. I'll respond separately to you. It isn't as high though, but that's in recognition that you're looking after an adult then. So an adult shouldn't actually need looking after, and it's more of a kind of a tenant landlady, landlord kind of arrangement, but with financial support from ourselves as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hay.
I think that this is a good move. It brings us in line with neighbouring counties. I mean, so at the moment, if somebody who lives on the border of Cambridgeshire decides they want to become a foster parent, if they're going to get more from the neighbouring county, they're obviously going to enrol with them. So it will help with taking on new foster parents, and it will also retain them. And I think over time, it could well, yes, there will be an initial cost, but if it means we're not having to use outside agencies because we're able to attract more foster carers, then obviously that cost will come down. So I'm all in favour of this.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. You know, it's key to recruitment really. And when you're recruiting carers, it's not some, you know, if you've got a complex payment, carers would just want to know really what, so I'm going to start at level 1 or level 2, what am I likely to get at that point? And this is a much more attractive offer because it resolves at lower rates at that lower level. So thank you. Yes, I agree with you.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. Councillor Lucy Netzinger. You're on mute, Lucy. Just that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think part of my question has just been answered by Anne's question and response, which was that this will be initially more expensive because we're paying more to people with taking in younger children, but that we hope that initial early cost will phase out as we have more in-house foster carers and less going out. So if you could just confirm that is the case, that would be really helpful. The second point was in response to the discussion with Joan, really. It was just a question about how many of our young people do in fact stay put, and whether they're then able to claim allowances, housing benefit type allowances at that stage to help support their living costs.
So yes, obviously part of the aim of doing this and simplifying it and increasing allowances, not so much for younger children, but just as for foster carers as they begin to become foster carers for us, is to make our recruitment more attractive. So absolutely, recruitment of foster carers spend less, hopefully, on independent fostering agency placements, which cost more than twice as much, with that money going to the agency, not to the carer. So that's the first bit. I'd have to, again, I haven't got the numbers staying put in front of me. It's usually around 20% of children and young people stay put with their carers, and they might stay put with their fostering agency carers as well. Actually, we do have a number of children or young adults who do that. And yes, absolutely, they're able to claim benefits, and part of the contribution that they make to their continuing living arrangement is that they start to pay rent themselves. So either that's from earnings or it's from local housing allowance payment. But we as a council also provide funding to the carer as well to top that up.
Thank you, that's great.
Thank you, Lou. Councillor Every.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a really excellent and detailed report, and I will be supporting this. I just wanted to say in support, as chair of the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee, I want to thank all our foster carers who play such an important part in the lives of our children in care. And on the subcommittee, which of course reports into this committee, we work incredibly closely with the foster carers themselves through their Foster Carer Association, and they input into our meetings regularly. And we see firsthand the wonderful work they do and learn also of the challenges that they face, which I think is important to know. They are highly skilled and professional in their work with the children, and they work, of course, incredibly closely with the social workers and the staff that support our youngsters. We've been really delighted with the response that the current marketing campaign has brought, and we've been able to recruit more of our own foster carers. And this is important if we are to redress the 60-40 ratio that we currently have, which will also, as has been said, make a huge difference to our costs in the long term. The recommendation will also enable closer synergy and working with our Peterborough partners, which will benefit us all enormously as we care for children in both of these areas, of course. I'm really pleased this has been brought before us. I think it's very timely, and I know that it will be welcomed by our foster carers. And now I'm going to do a plug. Please support the recruitment campaign. We haven't finished it yet. It's really, really important that we try to get as many foster carers working in-house as we possibly can, and to encourage people to come forward. So please don't forget that that is continuing, and we need your help to ensure that we get as many local foster carers as we can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Every. Councillor David Ambrose-Smith.
Hello, sorry to go back to the stay put allowance. You say to 18, but how old does it go on to? What age does it go on to?
It starts at 18.
Yes.
And it goes up to, in most circumstances, 21.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could just lower your hand when you finish speaking, that'd be useful. Thanks. Okay, so I propose to take the recommendations relating to the review of the fostering allowances for Cambridgeshire foster carers as a block. Would anyone object to the use of, would anyone like to object to that? If you do, raise your hand now. Okay, great. I will read the recommendations, okay. As this item does not relate to the council's education function, our co-opted members do not have voting rights on this item, okay. So, Andrew, just for your information. The recommendations are: agree the recommendation to reduce the number of payment bands for Cambridgeshire foster carers from the current 6 to 4, and agree the recommendation to change the payment schedule for foster carers as set out in Appendix 1 to this report, and support the submission of a further report to the General Purposes Committee in order to identify any further funding that may be necessary in order to implement the new payment structure. Okay, I'll take that as a unanimous decision unless I see anybody's hands go up now. Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. So just finally, I'm jumping around on my computer here, but yeah, I just want to reiterate what Councillor Every said. You know, we're engaged with our foster carers more than ever now, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. We really just want to keep pushing that campaign and keep our children local. So thank you again, members. We'll now move on to the next item, which is the COVID and monthly report. Officers have been asked to bring the report and a response to the COVID situation to date for those services for which each policy service committee is responsible. A similar report will be brought to each future meeting until further notice. Given the rapidly changing situation and need to provide the committee and public with the most up-to-date information possible, I accepted this as a late report on the following grounds. Reason for lateness: to allow the report to contain the most up-to-date information as possible. And the reason for urgency was to enable the committee to be briefed on the current situation in relation to the council's response to COVID-19 for those services for which it's responsible. Can I now ask John Lewis, the Service Director for Education, to introduce his part of the report, and then hand over to Lou Williams, the Director of Children's Safeguarding, to discuss his part of the report. So, gents, over to you, please.
Great. Thanks, Chair. I think the report is fairly self-explanatory, and you've seen my highlight report. We've, over the last 3 weeks or so, had multiple sets of guidance from the Department for Education about reopening, and that culminated with the secondary information coming last night and information on early years opening the day before. So at the moment, we're busy planning with our schools and our early years settings for our aspirations around meeting the government's requirement for a 1st of June opening. The absolute critical piece of information we're waiting for currently is the scientific advice around schools reopening. We're expecting that to come on Thursday, the 28th of May, and our intention is to speak to our head teachers and the trade unions on Friday, the 29th, about the implications behind that information and what it may mean for us in terms of the decision to open on the 1st of June. I think it's fair to say our leaders in schools have done a fantastic job again working with this information. We've held lots of briefing sessions. We've been busy trying to help them with developing risk assessments for the opening to make sure staff and children are protected through this process. It's fair to say the guidance is really clear that social distancing will not be able to be delivered within a school setting, and that's where the mitigation actions that schools are taking. A new principle to you is something called a bubble, where we try to keep children in smaller groups to sort of mitigate the impact of not being able to socially distance. But our leaders have done an amazing job getting themselves ready. So I'm very hopeful there are good plans in place for all schools, and we wait to hear the further scientific evidence on Thursday before deciding the next step of school. So thank you, Chair. Happy.
Okay, so just before we go to Lou then, so there are members who have indicated they want to speak. I just want to start as chair. John, I've been present on some of those briefings at the primary heads and the secondary heads, and I just really want to send that clear message from myself as chair to thank all the schools in Cambridgeshire for their continued effort in preparing for this. You know, we're still waiting for some finer details, but I know you and your team and all the schools in Cambridgeshire have really stepped up to the mark and planned for this, because it is a very fluid situation, and I think they've really gone above and beyond, really. So thank you. I just want to put that on record. Okay, so let's just move to Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, Jonathan, this is a highly controversial issue, as we've seen from the coverage in the press, and of course we've all had this letter from some of the parents in Cambridgeshire who are unhappy about the schools opening. I must say I personally have very mixed views about it, and I find it odd that they're just picking on 2 years, 1 and 6 in primary and 11 and 13 in, or 10 and 12, depending on how you want to look at it, in the secondary schools. You know, that the other children, well, we don't seem to mind about them. But I guess my question is primarily about the numbers you're expecting, because as I understand it, and I may be wrong, parents can choose whether or not they want to send their children to school before the start of the new school year in September. First of all, am I correct in assuming that parents in one sense can choose, because they will not be facing you know, a legal challenge if they do not send their children? And secondly, do we have any idea how many children therefore will come? Have we got means of finding out how many children we are actually expecting in our schools should they reopen? Thank you.
John, just before you answer that, can I, given this is a public meeting that's being viewed, could you, when you answer Joan's questions, could you just also, just for clarity, so that the viewing public can understand the year groups we're talking about that are going back or proposed to go back on the 1st? Well, it looks like he's frozen. Okay, well let's just hold the education side of it then, and we'll move to Lou, and then when we do recover, John, we'll go back to your question, Joan. Is everyone content with that?
That's
if
fine
you could
by
just
me,
take your
Simon,
hand,
thank you.
If you could just take your hands down then, and then when we go back to education, you could raise your hand again, and we'll just try and juggle around. So Lou, if you could introduce your part of the report, and then we'll come back to education. Thanks.
Absolutely. It's quite unnerving to see a frozen John in the right-hand corner, isn't it? Quite odd. Yeah, so as the report says, that this, you know, we obviously did quite a detailed report on children's services and COVID at the last special committee. So things haven't changed hugely. There are a couple of things that I just want to draw members' attention to. So the first is that you know, we are also we are now thinking about how we might restart some services in line with guidance, and government has produced some guidance around, for example, use of office buildings and ensuring social distance within those arenas. One of the areas, though, that we are looking at trying to re-establish sooner rather than later, and indeed are already increasing, is face-to-face contact for children in care with parents. The other bit that I just want to draw attention to is referenced in paragraph 3.7 of the report, but at the time of writing it wasn't clear what the financial implications of this might be. So what 3.7 talks about is the potential to use facilities at Grafham Water for any young person and what we would expect is that it would be a young person who's currently in care, and possibly more than one of the young person who's currently in care and whose treatment comes to an unplanned end. We're experiencing already some quite significant difficulties. We haven't got to a situation where we haven't been able to find a placement for a young person, but placements for young people are more difficult to find. They're always more difficult to find in the summer, even without a COVID-19 situation. And we really want to have the flexibility, if at all possible, to use Grafham Water. Ofsted have indicated that they're happy to consider registration, so it would be a regulated placement. The issue is that the cost of that would be around 24,000 to 30,000 a month in order to do so. Sounds like quite a lot of money, but as what we're talking about as a contingency, really. What I would say, though, is that we'll be in real difficulties if we just can't find a placement for a young person who's in our care on the first instance. And in the second instance, actually, you usually can, but at very high cost, because providers know that you're desperate. So costs tend to be north of £6,000 or £7,000 a week for an individual young person in those circumstances. So it would seem to be a sensible move to take. Councillor Bywater, I drafted a further recommendation to the report, which you might want to take at the end of the meeting, but it was just to raise that.
Yeah, and I think it is an important issue, and I think we should actually add a third recommendation C to this report. I've obviously spoken to you prior to the meeting, and I just want to run it by members, given, and I want an endorsement from the CYP committee in relation to that. So the wording that I've drafted for recommendation C is, I'll read it now, and I apologise, the ice cream van's coming into my close, so I do apologise. Committee is recommended to agree to an additional cost of £24,000 to £30,000 per month until September 2020 in order to maintain Grafham Water as a contingency in the event that we have no placement options for our older young people in care during the summer months, when there are always placement shortages. And I think that's just to clarify that we're happy as a committee that we've got that as an option for our older young people. Did everybody hear what I said in relation to recommendation C? Tamar, have you got that on record, so that when we move to the decision, we're comfortable with that?
Yes, I have, yes.
Okay, thanks. So Lucy, questions, Lucy?
Thank you. I also had questions for Jonathan. Do you want me to just do Lou to start with, or?
Yeah, sorry, Lucy. Yeah, if we could just stick to Lou at the moment, and then we'll come back to John, just to keep it clear, really.
Very good. Then mostly just to say, I think that supporting the Grafham Water suggestion is extremely sensible at this point. I think it's sensible because kind of for financial reasons, but it's also much better for our young people in Cambridgeshire if they can go somewhere relatively local, somewhere perhaps quite a lot of them will have been in the past on other occasions, rather than being shipped off to some specialist placement around the country, which is probably less ideal for them anyway. So I do think that's a very sensible suggestion. It seems unlikely that Grafham Water will be being used for all sorts of other things over the summer. And presumably this is a cost that will go into the list of additional costs which we're facing as a result of COVID. So some of it should come out of the additional government funding that's coming forward, because it's due to unusual circumstances.
Go on, Lou. Yeah, thanks, Lucy.
Thanks for that, Lucy. And yes, we will absolutely flag it, and have already done so, as a potential pressure as a result of unusual circumstances. And you're right, I would be much happier to know that young people who will be in some difficulty are local and actually are able perhaps to really benefit from the facilities at Grafton Water. It might be really, really good for them actually if it does come to pass. So thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Lou. And Councillor Simon Taylor.
Hello, thank you, Chair. It's funny actually. I'm glad you expanded on the Grafton Water, Lou, because it was a question I was going to ask. It may be. Did you say you've got an extra appendix? It may be that what I'm going to ask is in that. Can you expand a little bit on how will the children be looked after within that setting? So, I mean, obviously, I know it's a residential, so there are beds, there's cooking facilities. So, who will man it, and you know, how will they be looked after?
So, it would be a combination of people actually. So, some people who know Grafton Water well and who can do the instructing and perhaps you know in terms of all the facilities that are there. And Grafton Water staff, as you say, it is residential. They used to looking after young people overnight, but they're not so used to looking after our young people, of course. So we have also got young people's workers who we would redeploy. They're currently doing a range of other things, including some face-to-face. So we expect we would be able to use a combination of Grafton Water and also some Children's Social Services staff to provide care and support to those young people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Any other questions for Lou Williams? Okay, in that case, we'll go back to education now. We'll pick up from Councillor Whitehead's questions. John, did you get all of Joan's message to you before you froze?
Yeah, it's cold in here. This happens every time I come onto this. Yeah, I did. So just to clarify the year groups and the position across all our different settings. So early years is open to everyone with a focus that 3 and 4 year olds are supported first. And there's some recognition in the guidance around ratios and size and space being one of the considerations about how many children they admit. In primary, it's reception, year 1 and year 6 that are the key year groups in that priority order. So reception first, then year 1 and year 6. Alongside reception, there's early years provision in school as well. In terms of secondary, it is year 10 and year 12, where there is a requirement for schools to consider some face-to-face support for those students, not necessarily return to full lessons. We did have some clarity on that over the weekend. It does say in the guidance that only a quarter of the children can be in at any one time. And for special schools and alternative provision, it's ad hoc based upon children's needs. So it's very much a phased opening that's being considered. In terms of your question around fining parents, no, there will be no requirement for parents to attend if they choose not to, and we will not be fining as a local authority. We will obviously review that in September and in light of further government advice. And in terms of the numbers of take-up, I just had a quick look when I was re-logging back in. We have been collecting information from our primary schools at the moment. I've got about 3/4 of the schools responded. Hope to have the rest here later on. It's anywhere between about 30% of children will be taking up the offer in those year groups, up to about 70%. But you know, somewhere in between, about 50%, I would say is probably whereabouts we're going to be. So we're going to keep a very close eye on the numbers. Obviously, we're supporting schools with setting up their bubbles appropriately, and obviously, I'm happy to report back to the committee after the 1st of June.
Okay, thank you. Joan, have you got any other questions you want to come back on that?
Yes, could I just follow that up? I mean, it does seem to me very problematic because if you've got some of the pupils, say in year 1 in primary who've come and some in year 6, and therefore they're going to get obviously certain parts of the curriculum, they're going to get some teaching, which other children are not going to get. So it then seems to me you've got the difficulty when you get to September, assuming that everybody's going to be coming back in September, that you've kind of got to start all over again, because some of the pupils will have had, you know, some parts of the curriculum and others will not. And that does seem to me to certainly, speaking as a very long time ago, an ex-primary school teacher, that does seem to me to be rather problematic when it comes to September about how you build on what you did before, you know, the school holidays, assuming, of course, that children haven't forgotten everything during the school holidays, and then how you deal with new intakes of children. I just think it does create many problems. And I do ask myself, and perhaps, whether it actually is worth the effort, whether we should just say everybody starts in September, but clearly that's not what the government thought. But I do think it's going to raise certain issues.
John, did you want to come back on that? I know we've all got varying views on this, and ultimately parents are going to choose, aren't they? You know, they're either going to send their children back or they're not, given what we hear on Thursday. So, John, did you want to clarify anything?
Yeah, I think you know, there is a range of issues that you've described there. I think one of the disappointing things I felt from the guidance that came out from the government is that the priority should be placed on those in school, and home learning will continue for those at home, but it's said it should come as sort of secondary to that. You know, what I can say is leaders in schools are not treating it that way. They are very focused on supporting all children, and we will have a big bit of work to do in September and onwards to rebuild some of the legacy issues that have come from, you know, a child missing a third of an academic year, if not more. So I think there's lots of thinking still to be done. And at the moment, we're just focused in on trying to get open, if that's the right thing to do with the scientific advice. And I'll obviously come back and talk to you about what the next steps will be and how we're going to aim to catch them.
Thanks, John. Thank you. We'll move to Councillor Anne Hay now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank John and his team for the sterling efforts he's done in communicating with the schools. What I would like to ask him is, has he got a feeling from the schools on how they feel, how many will actually open and how many won't? Because I feel, yes, we all want what's best for the children and for the staff. I myself have grandchildren, both at primary and secondary, who will be affected, and my daughter-in-law is a teacher's assistant. What we have to realise is, though, that you can never eliminate risk 100%. You can only make sure that the best mitigating actions are put in place to minimise that risk. And I'm astounded at what I've heard from some of the unions, particularly the one who was caught on Zoom, clearly admitting they were using this situation as a political football. But if you could answer that about what sort of feeling you're getting back from the school, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, John, you can skip the political question, but you just stick to what you know.
That was the easy one to answer. I could have done that one. In terms of opening, I kind of get a feel that there will be about half will open on the 1st of June. I think the rest will open probably on the week commencing the 8th. One thing I didn't say that perhaps I should clarify going back is that opening for key workers will continue regardless of those year groups. So we're continuing to support those, and every school will be open on the 1st for key workers still. So we're not expecting anyone to close. We're certainly not getting any pushback. One of the challenges we do face is that obviously there's a lot of staff that aren't available to work. So that's taken some time to organise, get stuff set up. There are staff on the shielding list and the critically vulnerable list that mean that actually having a full opening is just not possible at the moment. So I think we'll see a staggered approach across that time. We have just been encouraging people to get themselves ready, have good plans in place, and aim to meet the government guidance, and where it's not, get up and running as quickly as you possibly can to support children, because obviously that's what the focus should be, is on children, but obviously in a safe and appropriate way.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks, Anne. And we'll move to Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. Several questions. First of all, I'm very, very glad to hear that our schools in Cambridgeshire are going to continue to make home learning a priority and supporting children who are at home a priority. If only 50% of our children are likely to be going back, and only those in reception in year 1 and year 6, even then, that's a tiny minority of children who are actually likely to be returning to school this month. And even if some of them then go back the following month, there will still be huge numbers of children who are needing to be at home, either because the place is not available for them at school, or because they have other reasons for not being able to go in, which are often very good reasons, either to do with the child's health or to do with the health of other people in their family. So it's very good to hear that schools are continuing to make that a priority, and it's slightly disappointing to hear that the government are reducing the support and the kind of priority that's being given to children who are not in school. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that while it's interesting to hear that only about 50% are planning, that there's between 30 and 70%, but it's likely to be around 50. My suspicion is that that will change quite quickly once schools are open. And I hope that schools are going to be able to kind of flex their numbers. My concern is that they're going to set up these bubbles for the number of children who say they're coming in, and that every week they'll get a few more. And it's going to be a constant juggling act for schools trying to respond to different numbers of children coming in, which I suspect to start with will go up. And then if anything happens in the local area, it may suddenly go down again. But let's hope that doesn't happen. So it was just to ask whether schools are making plans expecting that that will be the case. I think the most important question for me is, are you and our schools also, well, not so much schools, but are there plans being made to support families over the summer holidays? Because although you can argue all sorts of reasons why they've chosen particular year groups, clearly making it possible for families to go back to work is one of the reasons for getting children back to school. In normal times, during the summer holidays, parents have made all sorts of complex plans for children to go to after school clubs, holiday clubs, football clubs, orchestras, all kinds of things over the summer holiday, which at the moment probably don't know whether they can be open or not. And if they are going to be able to run, will need support in being able to get PPE and deciding what their risks are. I can see that for lots and lots of those small organisations that normally help provide childcare over the summer, the easy thing will be to say, oh, it's just too difficult and the risks are too high. And if they do that, there are going to be huge issues about making sure that childcare is available over the summer. So it was a question to ask whether people are thinking about that. And finally, it doesn't look to me as if very much is going to necessarily have changed between now and September. So are you getting ideas from schools about how they're planning to manage some of this stuff in September?
Okay, it's fine if I work down those then. So your first point around home learning, I think the one thing I would put out there as a challenge is that obviously we have teachers teaching in small groups. So there is a workload pressure on our teachers, and we must recognise that, but it doesn't mean a priority isn't being placed upon it. So that's where there will be some changes coming through. In relation to the way schools have set up bubbles, most have allowed some capacity in those numbers coming forward. We are caught by the government guidance, and I think I've covered this in the notes in the report rather than verbally, that they are limiting groups to 15. So very naturally, we normally work on a class size of 30. So there is always going to be a squeeze. So we may have scenarios actually where if the current guidance stays as it is, we may not be able to offer places to all children. So that's a bit of reality with the guidance, and we hope the government continues to review and look at that guidance going forward. In terms of the challenges around the summer holidays and cover and support, absolutely. We're actually more immediately worried about breakfast and after school clubs that are obviously filling that wrap round now, and obviously will fill some of that gap over the summer. And there is currently a bit of a conflict in the guidance. Actually, can children move between a bubble in a school into an after school club with a different group of children, and the conflict that creates, which has caused quite a lot of issues in terms of the physical delivery. And I've literally just got off a call before this one with the Department for Education, asking them that they give some advice and guidance on how we maintain that safety through structures whilst offering something that is a different provision but is important to key workers and families outside of those areas. And I'm certainly aware that breakfast and after school clubs will be much more limited come the 1st of June, because it's difficult to staff and retain those bubbles. In terms of September planning, I think actually we will turn our mind to that. We do have another government obligation to meet before then. They've talked about full opening of primaries with 1 month of the school year to go. That's technically will be the 24th of June. I think that's very ambitious that we're going to look at those sorts of arrangements, particularly given where we are with lockdown being eased and working through those arrangements. But yeah, we will certainly cast an eye on September when we know what the parameters will be and obviously what's happening with the COVID-19 situation. So it's definitely in our mind, and I think there will be 4 or 5 more phases probably we will go through before normal education returns to Cambridgeshire.
Okay, thank you. Lucy, did you want to come back on anything? Because you've still got your hand up. Are you content?
Can I just ask one more thing, which is, I mean, it seems to me that that an obvious solution to quite a lot of these concerns is that children should be in school some of the time, but not quite as much of the time as they are now, and then you can have some more distance and more flexibility for schools. Is that message going to government?
Yes, we've made significant representation around that. The guidance that came out had quite a reaction. They had a long list of questions from me within minutes about their operation and the way it works, particularly around things like infant schools that have the majority of their pupils eligible to go in. So we continue to have a regular dialogue and meeting them twice a week at the moment to make sure those views are heard. I'm also meeting with the trade unions to make sure we can share messages and have a consistent understanding of what's going on in Cambridgeshire. And we will continue to flag where we think the current approaches don't work for our children. So definitely on our agenda, keep a very close eye on.
Thank you, that's great.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and I'd just like to echo that. I've seen, John, you've been very dogged when it's been going back to the DfE. So on behalf of the committee, thanks for being like that, really, because we do need clarity. Right, so there's been a change in hands here now. So I'm going to go to Councillor Joan Whitehead.
Thank you, Simon. Actually, it is on this topic because there has been some discussion in the press about social distance. It does seem that 2 meters was perhaps somewhat arbitrary. There are other countries where the social distance is only 1 meter and somewhere it's 1.5 meters. So it all does seem rather arbitrary. And there was some kind of hint that possibly one of the next Smarties we might get as a reward is that the social distance becomes 1 meter. That would make a huge difference to trying to organise children in schools. And I just wonder, Jonathan, whether there'd been any, whether it's worth picking up on this debate that seems to be rumbling along about whether the social distance could be reduced to 1 metre. After all, the big issue is, does anybody sneeze over you, basically? So I just wondered whether we had a go at joining in that debate and saying what a significant difference the reduction to 1 metre would make in terms of practicalities.
So the guidance as it stands says 2 meters doesn't exist in a school. You cannot maintain a 2 meter distance. So I think 1 meter, 2 meters doesn't make a huge amount of difference. It's about how you manage the space and try and keep students safe through the way you operate and deliver. Interestingly, the early years guidance that came out Sunday evening actually talks about square meterage each child needs, which is a slightly different measure. I haven't quite figured out whether 2.3 square meters is less than a meter. I think it probably is if you stick a child in the middle of that 2.3 square meters. But there's all sorts of different measures. At the moment, we're following the guidance. We're trying to keep our bubbles as low as they can and sensibly operating. And we'll continue to monitor the national debate around distancing. But at the moment, in schools, there's an acknowledgement that there isn't any social distancing, but there are mitigating measures that schools should take.
Okay, thanks, John. Andrew Reid. You're on mute, Andrew. Just unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you. Apologies. Thank you, Chair. It was just one point and a question, please. First of all, I guess we just need to be a little bit mindful, don't we, that there are a range of responsible bodies who are making the decisions in our schools. And when we talk pejoratively about schools and children, whilst we take my hat off to the local authority in terms of the networking that's been going on, of course, when it comes to, for example, the opening of secondary schools, we've got to be mindful that we can influence the decisions of the responsible bodies in one, but we can actually be much more dictatorial on a consultative basis with our maintained colleagues. And I think it's important to remember that in terms of managing our own expectation of what we can insist that others do. The point around that was perhaps around the process of the risk assessments that have been undertaken at this stage by John's team with the maintained schools. It would seem to me that given the number of known unknowns, it'd be important for this committee to give some collective sign off on record that we feel that the risk assessments are fit for purpose in terms of the way that the schools are now completing them, getting them signed off on an individual level and after submission to the local authority. Of course, we don't have that so much, we don't have the same level of control over the other responsible bodies.
So shall I come back and explain the process we're going through? Because I think that might provide some reassurance, and certainly happy to share with you the risk assessment template that we produce for schools. But essentially, we have asked schools to produce those documents. In the case of all schools, we've asked them to consult with their governing body on the content and how they've mitigated risks in their particular context. If they are a VA school, a voluntary aided school, we've asked them to work with the diocese to seek that sign-off and approval. They then come to my team, who have looked at all the maintained schools. We've been through everyone, we have commented, we have sent them back to schools where there needs to be changes. They've come back and we have then formally signed those off on behalf of the local authority. And my intention is particularly with Simon and Wendy, is just to share with them those risk assessments to make sure they're confident and happy that we've done all we can to mitigate that risk. And Andrew's right, as a responsible body, the local authority, I think we can happily put our neck on the line and say we want to take that decision on behalf of, support the schools with the decision on their behalf. I know that's not universal with the local authorities, they're leaving it to a school and a governing body to decide, but we think this is, you know, big business and important things. So we have done a lot more than certainly neighbouring authorities in terms of overviewing, reviewing and amending risk assessments when we feel they're not suitable. So there is a thorough process in place, and I'm happy certainly to share the risk assessment template with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Councillor Downs.
Oh, yes, thank you. I wanted to say this. The conversation of the last half hour has just demonstrated how extremely difficult this situation is that we're in. It's without precedent, and we're all hoping for the best, really, and planning for the worst at the same time. I just want to place on record, Simon, my appreciation, my recognition of the work that's been done by the officers and also by the heads of schools. I'm on a governing body, and we're summoned tomorrow by Zoom to confirm the plans that have been drawn up. And I'm staggered by the detail and the quality of the work that is being done. I mean, 45 sides of A4 in the documents that we've got to consider tomorrow at Brampton Village Primary School. And there's a tremendous amount of effort going in. And it won't be all right for everybody all the time. I think the most important thing is the safety of the staff and the children rather than the educational provision. I've said to people that it matters more that a child and a teacher remain alive than that they improve their knowledge of the 11 times table. I really feel quite strongly that we are doing our very best, and I want to recognise that, and I hope you will find a way of recognising that with county officers and with our teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. It's very nice of you to say that. Thank you. Any other members who'd like to say anything on these two items, education or lose paper? No. Okay, so let's move to the recommendations then. Again, if you don't want to take this on block, then just raise your hand now and we can go to individual voting. But if I don't see any hands, I'll go to the recommendations on block. Okay, so we'll take it on block then. I will read the recommendations out, and obviously the additional one that I've added is A, to note the progress made to date in responding to the impacts of coronavirus. B, note the continuing commitment of staff across children's services and partner agencies, schools in particular, to ensure that the needs of vulnerable children and young people continue to be met. And C, the committee is recommended to agree to additional costs of £24,000 to £30,000 per month until September 2020 in order to maintain Grafham Water as a contingency in the event that we have no place options for older, younger people in care during the summer months when there are always placement shortages. We'll take that on block unless you've got an objection. I'll just wait a second to see if any hands appear. So that's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much, members. And just finally, John and Lou, again, I say this every time we sit as a chair. Thank you very much for all your efforts, and please cascade our thanks down the organisation to everybody in all your services. So thank you. Okay, members, we'll move on to agenda item number 10, which is the appointment of agenda plan, training plan and appointments. Okay, this is a bit of housekeeping, so just bear with me for a second because I will go through it. We will now review the committee's agenda plan and training plan. As this is the first meeting after the annual council, we are also being invited to make appointments to those outside bodies and internal advisory groups within the committee's area of responsibilities. Would the Democratic Services Officer update the committee on any changes to the agenda plan since publication?
I'm not aware of any changes, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Tamer. Again, members, we are in a very fluid situation, so and there are different pressures on officers and reports, so we will continually review that. Myself, Lou and Wendy and Sam, and we'll keep you updated on any significant changes. Okay, so do any members want to comment on that? Lucy, I see you've raised your hand.
It's on the appointments to outside bodies, in fact. Are you happy to take that now?
Just bear with me a second, Lucy, and I'll come back to that in a second. So I take it, Joan, do you want to just comment on the agenda plan?
It was not the planning consent, but it was the kind of, I presume we don't know at this stage whether we'll be, coming in person or whether we'll be Zooming. I guess that information will come later.
Okay, so it's a good point, Joan. You know that our plan, or if you look at our agenda plan, was to move around local authorities. Given the bizarre situation we find ourselves in, you'll note that we've got a meeting in June for our COVID response. We've also planning to go to South Cambridgeshire. I've advised officers that we will stay at Shire Hall or have a remote meeting, however that pans out, but we won't be going around the district until we in a better place. So it just makes it more sensible for members, parking, everybody whilst we're in this situation. So you don't have to worry, Joan, about getting somewhere else if you need to come to Shire Hall. Okay. Okay. So,
thank you, Simon. It was just a general.
Okay. Can you just take your hands down so that I know who wants to speak and who's? I'll come back to you in a second, Lucy. Okay, so is everybody content on the forward agenda plan? Okay, we'll now move to the appointments of outside bodies set in Appendix 3 to the report. Do any members have any questions, Lucy?
It's a comment rather than a question, really. So I'm down there as a representative on the College of West Anglia. I'm not sure that I'm really a county representative. I think it used to be that the county had a representative, but it's more like a normal governorship now. So it might just be worth Tamar checking whether that still needs to be on the list.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. I remember you went through the process to get on it. Tamar, can you take that? Can we take that outside the meeting?
Yes, I will. Yes.
Are you content with that, Lucy?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so there's no other hands raised. Are we happy to take that as happy to vote that everyone's content on that? Joe, excuse me. Joan, your hand's up and now down. So is everybody content on the Appendix 3 outside?
Yes,
bodies?
it's up. Can I just say on the Education Achievement Board that I am still down on that. And that's a bit tricky. I mean, if it's a Zoom meeting, I'm happy to stay on it. But obviously, if it's not, then unless it's on the same day as CYP or a full council meeting, I think I'm unlikely to attend that. So perhaps Simon, out of this meeting, we need to think about who else should go on that. You know, whether it has to be somebody for the Children and Young People's Committee, or whether one of my other Labour group colleagues could come on instead of me. So perhaps we could just consider that out of the meeting.
Okay, we will do that. Wendy, can we sorry, John, I think is probably the best person to just look at that. When Joan, if you could speak to your group about it,
yeah,
and potentially propose a representative for it, and then we can bring it through this process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so is everybody content with that? Simone?
Yeah, it's not actually on that, but just briefly on the Education Achievement Board, when will we be having those meetings again? Because obviously the last one was cancelled.
Yeah. John, do you want to come back?
Obviously, the focus of those has been about educational improvement. We won't be having any data this year because there's no published results, but I suggest we probably get together in the autumn and talk about some more of the detail about how we recover and some of the latest education initiatives. So I think at the moment it's probably not the right time, but we'll do that in the early autumn. I'll get a date in for October, I think, when we're planned to have a meeting, but we'll get another one in.
Thanks, John. That is sensible, and I'm also very mindful of the pressure on our officers' time as well at this moment in time. So we will look at that in the autumn. Thank you. Okay, so we'll now move to the recommendation. So is to agree the appointments of outside bodies. It's just a process we've got to do here. Is everybody in agreement? Raise your hands if you're not, is the answer. Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you, members. Bear with me a second. Okay, so finally, we're just asked to agree the appointments to internal advisory groups and panels, where we've just potentially talked about that. This includes the appointment of vice chair and chair to the corporate parenting subcommittee. Do any members have any questions on that? Okay, so we'll move to the recommendation. Agree the appointments to internal advisory groups and panels as detailed in Appendix 4. If you're not in agreement, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll take it as a unanimous decision. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that now brings us to the end of the meeting. That was the final item of business today. The committee will next meet on the reserved date of Tuesday, the 23rd of June, and the arrangements will be confirmed nearer the time. I would like to thank the members of the press and the public who are watching via our live stream for taking the time to join us and for the interest in this committee's work. Thank you very much, members, officers. Stay safe, and I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you.